There are curses that announce themselves, sharp and sudden, like a blade finding bone. And then there are the ones that grow quietly into the shape of your life, until you no longer know where the curse ends and where you begin. That was the kind Nora had lived with. For 20 years, she had been told the stillness inside her was simply who she was. Wolfless, powerless, a girl born into a pack that moved like a storm and stood like stone. And she, somehow, the one crack in the foundation, they all tried not to look at directly. They had whispered different things at different times, that the moon goddess had forgotten her, that she had been born already broken, that it was a mercy, really, that her wolf had never surfaced. Better to have nothing than to have something and lose it. She had believed them. What else do you do? When the people who are supposed to love you most are the first to draw the boundary between what you are and what you could never be. She learned to keep her hands at her sides, to stand in rooms without touching anything, to want less, need less, take up less, to make herself so small that the emptiness inside her would stop echoing back at her from their eyes. She did not know she was a vessel. She did not know that what they called weakness had a heartbeat. And she did not know that 20 years of careful, deliberate containment would unravel the night a king reached for her arm in a darkened corridor, not as a lover, not as a captor, but simply to keep her from falling. He did not know what he had done. Neither did she. Not yet. The morning of the Alpha King's inspection began the way all difficult things began in Nora's life, quietly, and with no warning at all. She was in the root cellar when she heard the drums, 3 long beats, a pause, then 2 short ones, the kingdom signal. Not the war drums. Those were low and continuous, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. These were the announcement drums, the kind that meant someone of consequence was coming, and everything in the pack's territory was expected to be clean, ordered, and presentable by the time the banners crested the ridge. Nora set down the bundle of dried wolfsbane she had been sorting and listened to the pack above her begin to move. She could feel it through the cellar floor, the vibration of 200 wolves suddenly shifting direction at once, the way a flock of birds wheels in unison without a word being spoken. That was pack instinct. That was the bond she had read about in the old record books she wasn't supposed to touch, the invisible thread that connected every wolf in Ashenmoor to every other, a current of shared knowing running beneath all speech and ceremony. She did not feel it. She never had. Nora climbed the cellar steps into gray morning light and stood for a moment at the edge of the courtyard, watching the pack arrange itself. Women pulling children indoors, sentinels straightening at their posts, elder wolves moving toward the greeting hall with the particular stiffness of people performing dignity under pressure. And at the center of all of it, directing the movement with a single raised hand, stood her father. Kirk of Ashenmoor was not a cruel man in the way that novels described cruelty, volcanic, demonstrative, easy to name. He was the other kind, the quiet kind, the kind that came from a man who had decided long ago that certain losses were simply the cost of order, and that the cleanest way to bear them was to stop looking at them directly. He had stopped looking at Nora directly when she was 4 years old. That was the year the healer had delivered the verdict in this very courtyard. Young Kirk, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, his face arranged into the careful blankness of a man receiving information he intended to survive. The girl has no wolf. Whatever bond the moon goddess intended was severed at birth, or perhaps never forged at all. She will not shift. She will not feel the pack bond. She is, for all practical purposes. The healer had not finished the sentence. She hadn't needed to. Nora had been told about this moment by her mother once, in the brief years before her mother had also become someone who looked slightly past her when they spoke. Your father held very still, her mother had said, like a man deciding something, and whatever he had decided in that moment of held stillness had governed the 20 years since. Not violence, not overt rejection, but a careful architectural distance. Nora was housed. Nora was fed. Nora was given tasks that kept her useful and occupied and away from anything that required the pack bond to perform. Root cellar work, record keeping, inventory of the stores. She was, in every practical sense, the pack's most educated servant. And everyone, including Nora, on her worst nights, understood that this was a generosity she was meant to be grateful for. You. A hand closed around her upper arm, and she turned to find Marit standing behind her. Her father's second wife, narrow-faced and efficient, already dressed for receiving. Mariette had never bothered with cruelty either. She simply managed Nora the way one manages a piece of furniture that is slightly the wrong size for the room, working around it, angling it toward walls, making sure it was never in the direct line of sight of anyone who mattered. Get inside, change into the gray dress. You're to stand with the household staff at the back of the receiving line. Who is coming? Nora asked. Marit's eyes moved over her face with the brief, assessing look of someone calculating whether an answer was worth the time it took to give. "Oh, the Alpha King," she said. "His court is making its inspection of the northern packs. He will be here by midday." A pause. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with the royal wolves. And for the love of the moon, keep your hands at your sides. This last instruction was the one that had followed Nora her whole life, in one form or another. Keep your hands still. Don't reach for things. Don't touch. She had assumed, for most of her childhood, that it was about manners. It was only later, much later in the old record books she wasn't supposed to touch, that she had found the older instruction, written in a hand she did not recognize, pressed into the back of a ledger from the year of her birth. The girl must not be permitted to touch the wards, under any circumstances. The bindings are stable so long as contact is avoided. She had read it 3 times. Then she had placed the ledger back exactly as she had found it, and she had gone back to the root cellar, and she had sorted wolfsbane until her hands stopped shaking. That had been 6 months ago. She had not spoken of it to anyone. There was no one to speak to. Not in Ashenmoor, where every wolf was threaded into the pack bond she could not access, where every whispered conversation was felt by the alpha before the words had finished leaving the mouth. Secrets in a pack were not truly secrets. They were only things that had not yet reached the right ears. Nora's secrets survived because no one was listening for them. She changed into the gray dress. The Alpha King arrived at midday, as promised. She heard his procession before she saw it. Not drums this time, but the quality of silence that preceded him, the way all ambient sound in the courtyard seemed to hold its breath and step back. She was standing at the far end of the household staff line, half hidden behind the broader shoulder of Cook Brennan, when the gates opened. He entered on foot. She had expected a horse. The stories always described Alpha Kings on horseback, elevated, theatrical, performing their power for the crowd. But Cole of the High Throne walked, and somehow that was worse, because it meant his height was real, not borrowed from a saddle. It meant the width of his shoulders was his own, and it meant that when he moved, unhurried and absolute, through the parting crowd of Ashenmoor wolves bowing at the neck, he was simply a man. And somehow that made him more impossible to look at directly, not less. He was dark-haired, pale-eyed, dressed in traveling leathers without ceremony or adornment beyond the silver clasp at his throat that marked his rank. His face was the kind that had been built for a colder world than this one, all clean angles and a jaw that suggested he had stopped finding most things surprising sometime in his late adolescence and had not revised this position since. He did not smile at the assembled pack. He did not need to. Nora watched him move down the line, watched the Ashenmoor wolves straighten as he passed them, watched her father step forward with the particular performance of a man demonstrating his own worthiness, and she felt the thing she always felt in moments like this. Nothing, not the pack bond, but not the warm gold thread the books described, not the pressure of his dominance in her chest, the way the other wolves clearly felt it, their eyes dropping, their bodies orienting toward him the way flowers rotate toward light. Just absence, the ordinary, familiar absence. She was looking at the middle distance. the practiced gaze of a person making themselves invisible when his procession brought him level with her position in the line. And then she made the mistake. She did not know why she looked. Some small, involuntary reflex, the same reflex that makes you look up when someone is looking at you, that animal awareness of being observed. But when her eyes moved to his face, she found, with a cold shock of surprise, that he was already looking at her. Not at the line, not past her. In the general survey of a powerful man assessing territory. At her, specifically. His pale eyes held hers for 2 seconds, no more. His expression did not change. He did not slow his step. He gave her nothing to interpret, nothing to name. He simply looked at her, and then he looked away, and he moved on down the line as though it had not happened at all. Beside her, Cook Brennan exhaled with the shaky relief of a man who had just watched lightning strike somewhere other than where he was standing. Nora kept her hands at her sides. Her heart was doing something she had no vocabulary for, a sharp, dissonant thing, like a note struck on an instrument she had not known was inside her. She did not know that he had seen her. She did not know that he would ask her father, privately, over the midday meal, who the gray-eyed girl at the end of the staff line was. She did not know that her father's answer, careful, dismissive, the answer of a man describing furniture, would be the first sentence of the end of everything she had been told her whole life was true. She only knew that her hands were trembling, and that she did not, for once, entirely know why. The Alpha King's court was given the eastern wing. This was Ashenmoor's finest offering, high-ceilinged rooms with stone floors that had been scrubbed to a pale gleam, fires laid in every hearth, the good linen brought out from the cedar chest where Marit kept it preserved in dried lavender and careful silence. Nora knew this because she had carried the linen herself, 4 trips up the east staircase with her arms full of pressed white cloth. Passing royal wolves in the corridor who looked through her with the practiced ease of people who had learned which details of a room were worth registering. She was not a detail worth registering. This had always been, in its own bleak way, a form of protection. She was finishing the last room, a corner chamber with 2 narrow windows that faced the forest, assigned to one of the king's senior advisors, when she heard the footsteps in the corridor outside. Not the heavy, deliberate tread of a royal wolf on patrol. Something quieter, more controlled. The footsteps of someone who had learned, long ago, to move through spaces without announcing themselves. She should have finished faster. She was still tucking the far corner of the bedsheet when the door opened. Nora straightened and turned in one movement, already composing her face into the expression she wore for these moments. Eyes down, body angled slightly toward the wall, the whole posture of a person signaling that she occupied no meaningful space and required no meaningful response. The Alpha King stood in the doorway. He was alone. No advisors, no sentinels, none of the retinue that had surrounded him in the courtyard like a second skin. Just him, in the same traveling leathers, holding a document he had apparently been reading as he walked. And he stopped when he saw her, the way a person stops when they open a door expecting an empty room and find it occupied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nora's mind ran the calculation rapidly. This was not the room assigned to him. She had seen the chamber prepared for the Alpha King at the end of the corridor, the largest room, the one with the fireplace wide enough to stand in. He was in the wrong room, which meant he had either chosen to be in the wrong room or he had not been paying attention to where he was walking, and everything she had observed about him in the courtyard suggested the second option was unlikely. "This room is assigned to Lord Cassian," she said. Her voice was steady. She had spent 20 years making her voice steady. "Your chamber is the last door on the right." He looked at her. Then he looked at the room, a brief, unhurried assessment, and then he looked at her again. "I know," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected. Not performatively deep, not the trained projection of a man accustomed to addressing crowds. Just low and even, and carrying the particular quality of a person who had never needed to raise it to be heard. Nora waited. He stepped fully into the room, and she recognized with a kind of calm dread that he was not leaving. He moved to the window and stood there for a moment, looking out at the tree line, the document still held loosely at his side. "Your Alpha told me you manage the household records," he said. Not a question. "Yes. How long?" 12 years. He turned from the window then and looked at her with an attention that was different from the courtyard look, less reflexive, more deliberate. She had the uncomfortable sensation of being read, the way she read the old ledgers, carefully and without rushing. "You were standing at the end of the staff line," he said, "not with the pack." It was not quite a question either. He seemed to favor this. The statement offered with enough space around it to become a question if she chose to treat it that way. "I manage the household records," she said. "I am staff." Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, more like the expression of a man who has been given an answer that confirms something he was already thinking and does not yet know whether to be satisfied or troubled by the confirmation. "What is your name?" "Nora." "Nora." He said it once, as though placing it somewhere. "Your Alpha's daughter." "His eldest." A pause. Outside, a crow called once from the forest edge and went silent. "He did not mention that," the Alpha King said. And this time there was something in his voice. Not warmth exactly, but a slight cooling in the evenness of it. The way clear water changes quality when something passes beneath the surface. Nora said nothing. There was nothing to say that was also safe to say. She had spent 20 years learning the difference. He watched her not answer him, and something shifted in the set of his jaw. A small, almost imperceptible thing, like a lock deciding it has not been properly closed. "The pack records," he said. "I will need to review them tonight. Border tallies, tribute logs, the last 3 cycle reports. I can have them prepared within the hour." "Bring them yourself." She looked at him then, a full look, not the careful peripheral awareness she usually permitted herself in rooms with powerful wolves. It was an involuntary thing, the same reflex as the courtyard. He was watching her with the same unreadable steadiness he had offered the tree line, and she had the sudden, disorienting sense that he was waiting for something. Not the records. Something else. Something he was not going to name until he understood what it was himself. "The records," she said carefully. "To your chamber." "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." Nora held his gaze for one more second, long enough to understand that this was not a test of her compliance, which she had navigated 1,000 times before. It was something stranger than that, and therefore more dangerous. "I will bring them within the hour," she said. She gathered the last of the spare linens from the bed, tucked them under her arm with the particular efficiency of a woman who had learned to end conversations by simply moving through them, and walked to the door. She was almost through it when he spoke again. "Nora." She stopped, did not turn. "Ah, your hands," he said. She looked down. Her free hand, the one not occupied with the linens, was pressed flat against the doorframe. She had not noticed herself reach for it. She did not remember making the decision to touch it. She pulled her hand back. "Forgive me," she said. Automatic. 20 years of automatic. She did not hear him respond. She was already in the corridor, moving toward the staircase, her heart doing that nameless, dissonant thing again, louder now and less easy to dismiss. The records were ready in 40 minutes. She had pulled the border tallies from the east cabinet, the tribute logs from the locked drawer to which she alone held the key, and the cycle reports from the tall shelf where they were stored in order of date, their spines worn smooth from her own handling. But she knew these records better than anyone in Ashenmore. She had written most of them herself, Kirk's signature at the bottom, her hand in every line above it. She had not, until this moment, thought very carefully about what they contained. She thought about it now, standing at the Alpha King's door with the stack of ledgers in her arms, and she understood with a cold, sudden clarity that she was about to hand a king the documentation of her own father's governance. Every decision, every number, every border adjustment and tribute miscalculation for the past 12 years. and that her father did not know she was doing it. She knocked. "Enter." He had removed the traveling leathers. He wore a plain dark shirt now, the sleeves rolled to the elbow, seated at the writing table with 2 candles lit against the darkening afternoon. The room felt smaller with him in it. Not oppressively so, but the way a room feels smaller when something that generates its own gravity is occupying the center of it. Nora set the ledgers on the table beside the candles. He pulled the nearest one toward him without looking up, opened it, and began to read. She had assumed he would dismiss her. She remained standing, waiting for it. He did not dismiss her. He turned a page, read it, turned another. Then, without looking up, "The tribute figures in the 3rd quarter report. They have been adjusted." It was not a question. Nora's hands were very still at her sides. "The original tallies are in the margin," she said, "in pencil." He looked up then, looked at her with the full force of that pale, unhurried attention. "You recorded the adjustments," he said slowly. And kept the originals visible." "I keep accurate records," she said. "That is my function." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. He studied her face with the focused, unreadable quality of a man who has just found something in a room he did not know to look for and is deciding what to do about it. "Sit down," he said. "My lord." "Sit down, Nora. We are going to go through every one of these together, and you are going to tell me what I am looking at." She sat. Outside, the forest dark had fully arrived, pressing itself against the 2 narrow windows. Somewhere in the east wing, a door closed. Somewhere further, a wolf laughed at something, and the sound carried and faded. Inside the corner room, the Alpha King turned another page, and Nora, for the first time in 20 years, I opened her mouth and told the truth to someone who had the power to do something with it. She did not notice, as the hours passed and the candles burned lower, that every time she reached across the table to point to a figure in the ledger, her fingertips came within a breath of his. She did not notice the faint warmth that moved through the stone of the table when she touched it. She did not notice that the single dead candle in the iron bracket above the fireplace, unlit since she had entered the room, flickered once, without source, and held a small, uncertain flame. He noticed. He said nothing. The flame in the iron bracket burned all night. Nora did not see it go out because she did not stay to watch it. She had left the Alpha King's chamber when the candles on the writing table had burned to their last inch. 3 hours. Oh, perhaps 4, the kind of time that passes differently when you are doing something your whole life has been arranged to prevent you from doing. Speaking, being heard. Having your words treated as information rather than inconvenience. She had walked back to her room in the servants' corridor with the careful, deliberate steadiness of someone who understands they are carrying something fragile and cannot afford to examine it until they are behind a closed door. Then she had sat on the edge of her narrow bed and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and stared at the wall until the shaking stopped. She did not know what she had done. She knew what she had done. 12 years of records. 12 years of adjusted tribute figures, quietly altered border tallies, tithe numbers that had been moved in the ledger the way furniture is moved in a room, not removed, just repositioned, so that the view from a certain angle looked clean. She had recorded all of it faithfully, in the way she had taught herself to be faithful, not to the story her father wanted told, but to the numbers beneath it, preserved in pencil in the margins, patient as buried seeds. She had told herself all these years that she kept the originals because it was the correct archival practice, that it was professional, that it had nothing to do with the slow, cold anger she carried in the part of herself she did not look at directly. Sitting on her narrow bed at the end of this particular night, she stopped telling herself that. She slept 3 hours and was in the root cellar by dawn. The inspection was scheduled for 2 days. She had calculated with the precision of someone who had survived by calculating that if she remained useful and invisible in roughly equal measure, she could pass the remainder of the Alpha King's visit without further incident. She had given him the records. She had told him what they meant. What he did with that information was the business of kings, and kings moved in a world that did not intersect with hers. This was the plan. The plan lasted until mid-morning, when one of the Alpha King's sentinels appeared at the cellar steps and said, with the brisk discomfort of a man delivering a message he found slightly baffling, that his lord required her presence in the records room. The records room was a small, windowless space off the main hall that Nora used for inventory and cross-referencing, a room of shelves and ledgers and the particular smell of old paper and iron ink that she privately found more comforting than any other smell in Ashenmoor. She had arranged it herself over years in the way she arranged all the spaces she was permitted to occupy, with the quiet, exacting care of someone furnishing a life from the inside out, since the outside had never been offered. The Alpha King was already there when she arrived. He was not alone. Beside him stood a man she had not seen in the courtyard, younger than the king by perhaps 5 years, with a broad, open face and the kind of easy physical presence that suggested he had grown up in rooms where he was welcome. He was looking at the shelf of cycle reports with an expression of unguarded curiosity, pulling one out and flipping through it the way a person handles objects they find genuinely interesting. "Lord Owen," the sentinel said behind her, "the Alpha King's chief liaison." Owen looked up from the report and smiled at her. A full, uncomplicated smile, the kind Nora so rarely received that she spent a half-second simply processing it before she could respond. "You organized all of this?" he asked, gesturing at the shelves. "Yes. In order of pack cycle or calendar year?" "Both," she said. "Cross-indexed. Calendar year on the left spine, cycle number on the right." Owen looked at the shelf, then back at her, with the expression of a man who has just been told a piece of information that delights him. "That is," he said, "genuinely the most sensible archival system I have seen in 30 Northern Pack visits." "Lord Owen," the Alpha King said, from the table where he had been standing in silence, "is easily delighted." It was the driest thing she had heard him say. It was also, she realized, the first thing she had heard him say that was not a question or a directive. The first sentence that existed simply to exist, carrying something faintly like wryness in it. Owen, apparently accustomed to this, ignored it entirely. "I mean it," he said to Nora. "Who taught you this system?" "No one. I developed it." A beat. Owen glanced at the Alpha King with the quick, sideways look of a man communicating something in a private language. The king did not visibly respond, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted, the faintest adjustment. The kind you only caught if you were already watching carefully. Nora was already watching carefully. She had been watching carefully her whole life. It was the one skill her particular position had perfected absolutely. "Sit down," the Alpha King said. "Both of you." They worked through the morning. The Alpha King asked questions and Nora answered them, and Owen occasionally interjected with a supplementary question or a remark that seemed designed, at least in part, to make the proceedings feel less like an interrogation and more like a conversation. She appreciated the effort without being entirely taken in by it. Owen's warmth was genuine. She could tell the difference between performed warmth and actual warmth, having been offered the performed variety for most of her life, but he was also a liaison. And liaisons were paid in information. She gave both men what she had already given the king the night before, the truth, precisely calibrated, no more and no less than what the records themselves contained. She pointed out the adjusted figures. She identified the pattern of the adjustments, always in the third quarter, always in the border tallies, always by a margin small enough to be mistaken for clerical error by anyone who only examined 1 year at a time. She did not say her father's name. She did not need to. When she finished, Owen was quiet for a moment, an unusual quality in him she had already gathered. Then he said, "How long have you known?" 6 months, she said, with certainty. "Longer, in the way you know things you have not yet permitted yourself to know." He looked at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite admiration, but lived in the country between them. The Alpha King was looking at the ledger. "Why did you keep the originals?" he said, "if you were not planning to show them to anyone?" It was the question she had asked herself on her narrow bed at the end of last night. She had not arrived at a clean answer then. She did not arrive at one now. "I kept them," she said finally, because erasing them felt like agreeing. The room was quiet. Outside in the hall, she could hear the pack moving, the ordinary sounds of midday, boots on stone, a child being called in from the yard, the distant clatter of the kitchen, the sounds of a world that did not know it was in the process of being examined. She became aware in the silence that her right hand was resting on the surface of the table. Not pressing flat as she usually kept it, just resting, easy and open, the way a hand rests when its owner has briefly stopped managing it. She became aware of this because of the warmth. It was faint, barely there, the way warmth is barely there when you hold your palm above a candle without touching the flame. A resonance in the wood of the table, low and persistent, moving in a slow pulse she could feel through her fingertips and up the inside of her wrist. She told herself it was the heated room. She told herself it was tiredness, the 3 hours of sleep, the strain of the morning. She moved her hand to her lap and the warmth stopped. She did not look up. She did not look at the Alpha King across the table. She did not look at the place where his hand rested on the open ledger, inches from where hers had been. She looked at the records. She kept her voice level. She continued. Owen found her that afternoon in the small herb garden behind the kitchen. She was there because it was the one outdoor space in Ashenmoor where she was reliably alone, small and slightly overgrown, used by Cook Brennan for practical herbs and by no one else for anything at all. She was cutting back the late-season growth with the focused, methodical energy of a person who needs to do something with her hands and cannot think of anything else permissible. Owen sat on the low stone wall without being invited, in the manner of a man for whom being invited was rarely a prerequisite. "You know what I am going to say," he said. "See, I suspect you are going to tell me what happens next," she said, without stopping what she was doing. "We file a full inspection report with the High Throne. Your father will be called to answer the discrepancies formally. The pack will be placed under provisional governance while the matter is reviewed." He paused. "It will not be quiet. No. Your position here will be untenable," she said. "Yes, I know." She cut a long stem of overgrown rosemary and set it aside. "He wants to offer you a position," Owen said. "At the High Throne, records management for the royal court." Another pause, and she had the sense he was choosing his next words with more care than was usual for him. "He does not make this kind of offer." Nora was quiet for a moment. "He does not know me," she said. "No," Owen agreed. "But he reads people the way you read ledgers, quickly and accurately and with particular attention to what has been adjusted." He looked at her sideways. "He says you keep honest records." "I keep accurate records," she said, the same words she had used the night before, in the same even tone. "In his experience," Owen said, "they are the same thing." She looked at him then, the full look, the involuntary one. He was watching her with that open, uncomplicated face, and she understood, with the particular clarity of a person who has spent 20 years reading rooms, that he was not here entirely on the king's behalf. He was here because he was the kind of man who noticed the people that rooms were arranged to hide and found them more interesting than the people the rooms were arranged to display. "Why are you telling me this yourself?" she asked. "Instead of him?" Owen smiled, a smaller version of the earlier one. "Because he is not good at offering things," he said. "He is very good at commanding things, and tolerably good at requesting things, but offering—" He tilted his head. "Offering requires a certain admission of want. He finds that difficult." Nora looked at the rosemary in her hand. She thought about the candle that had not been lit. She thought about the warmth in the table, and the warmth in the door frame the night before, and the small, persistent pulse she had been telling herself was tiredness or heated rooms or any one of the 20 other explanations she had assembled and discarded since yesterday morning. She thought about the ledger pressed into the back of the old record book, and the handwriting she did not recognize, and the sentence that had been waiting inside her for 6 months, like a key with no visible lock. The bindings are stable so long as contact is avoided. "Tell him," she said slowly, "that I will consider it." Owen nodded, as though this was precisely the answer he had expected her to give. He stood, brushed stone dust from his sleeve, and paused at the garden gate. "One more thing," he said, "and I say this as a man who has ridden with Cole of the high throne for 11 years, and therefore has some authority on the subject." He looked back at her, and the easy warmth in his face had settled into something more serious. "Whatever you have been told about yourself in this place, whatever this pack decided you were, when you were too young to argue with the decision," he stopped, seemed to consider whether to finish. "He was watching you last night," he said quietly, "after you left. He sat in that room for an hour without opening a ledger. I have never seen him do that." He left her with that, and the gate swung shut behind him, and Nora stood in the overgrown herb garden in the fading afternoon light with rosemary in her hands and a warmth moving through her fingers that had no possible source. Above the kitchen roof, a single dead branch on the old ash tree, bare and gray and given up since autumn, held at its very tip the tight-curled ghost of a new bud. She did not see it. She was looking at her hands. The dream came that night without invitation, the way the truest dreams always did. She was standing in a forest she did not recognize, not Ashenmoor's dark pines and cold undergrowth, but something older, the trees enormous and widely spaced, their bark silver-white in moonlight that fell straight and clear as water. The ground beneath her feet was soft with decades of fallen leaves, and the air had the quality of air that has never been breathed by anything afraid. She was not afraid. That was the first strange thing. The second was the light. It was coming from her hands. Not dramatically, not the blazing, theatrical light of the stories she had read as a child, goddesses and moonfire and power that announced itself like a proclamation. This was quieter than that. A faint, silver luminescence moving beneath the skin of her palms, the way light moves beneath the surface of deep water, present, patient, entirely certain of itself. She turned her hands over and looked at them. "There you are," something said. Oh, in a voice that was not a voice. She woke to gray dawn and the sound of raised voices in the hall below. She dressed quickly and went to the top of the staircase and listened, because listening was the skill she had sharpened longest and trusted most. Her father's voice, low and controlled, the voice he used when he was performing calm he did not feel. A second voice she did not immediately recognize, clipped and official, belonging to one of the Alpha King's advisors. And beneath both, a third thread of sound, the particular quality of silence that gathered around the Alpha King when he was present and had chosen not to speak yet. She descended to the landing. The entrance hall had arranged itself into the geometry of a confrontation. Her father stood near the door with Merritt at his shoulder, both of them dressed with the careful formality of people who had been awake longer than they were admitting. Across from them, two of the king's advisors held open ledgers. Her ledgers, she recognized the spines, and between the two groups, like weather occupying the space between two shorelines, stood Cole of the High Throne. He had his back to the staircase. He did not turn when she stopped on the landing, but something in the set of his shoulders changed. The faint, almost imperceptible adjustment she had catalogued the morning before, and she understood that he knew she was there. Her father saw her. The look he gave her lasted less than a second and contained everything that had lived unspoken between them for 20 years. The accounting of it, the cold and final ledger of what she had cost him and what he had paid and what he had decided, long ago, that she owed him in return for being permitted to remain. She had read that look her whole life. She knew every line of it. What was new this morning was that she looked back. Not defiantly, not with the tight, performed composure of a person suppressing something. Simply, steadily. The way she looked at figures in a record that she had checked and found accurate, and would not be revising. Kirk of Ashenmoor looked away first. She did not mark it as a victory. She filed it carefully in the part of herself that kept the originals. The discrepancies span 12 cycles, one of the advisors was saying, with the brisk precision of a man who found numbers more comfortable than rooms full of human consequences. The cumulative shortfall in tribute to the High Throne amounts to— I am aware of the amount, the Alpha King said. Silence. He turned then, a slow, unhurried pivot, and looked up at the landing where Nora stood. His pale eyes found hers with the directness she was still learning to receive without flinching. "Come down," he said. It was not a command the way his commands to his sentinels were commands. It was quieter than that. The difference between an order issued to a soldier and a hand extended to someone standing on the wrong side of a threshold. She came down. She stood beside him, not behind him, not across the room, but beside him, which was itself a statement she had not been consulted about and could not immediately interpret, while the advisors laid out the formal record of what the ledgers contained. She watched her father's face as the figures were read aloud, and she watched Meret's hand find her father's arm in a gesture that was half comfort and half restraint. When the advisors finished, the Alpha King spoke. Kirk of Ashenmoor. His voice was even, unhurried, carrying the weight of institutional authority without needing to raise itself. The tribute shortfall will be repaid in full within 2 cycles. The border adjustments will be corrected and reported to the High Throne within 30 days. You will submit to a full governance review to be conducted by Lord Owen, beginning at the next moon. A pause. These are not negotiable terms. They are the recorded consequences of what the ledgers contain. Do you understand them? Her father said yes. The word came out smaller than she had ever heard his voice. Good. The Alpha King turned slightly toward the advisors. Record it. What happened next took less than a minute, and Nora would think about it for much longer than that. Her father looked at her. A second look, different from the first. The accounting look was gone. What replaced it was something rawer and less composed, the face beneath the performance, and she recognized it because she had felt it herself on her narrow bed at the end of the previous night. It was the look of a person who has been carrying a manageable weight for a very long time and has just been informed that the carrying is over and does not yet know whether to feel relieved or destroyed. She did not feel sorry for him. She was surprised to discover she did not feel triumphant either. And what she felt was something without a clean name, large and complicated and too honest for this entrance hall full of people, so she folded it away, neatly, in the place she kept such things, and looked back at the advisors. Marit's voice came then, sharp and sudden, the careful management cracking along one precise line. She has no standing here, Marit said. She is wolfless. She has no pack bond. Whatever she told you last night? Her eyes found Nora with the focused, pressurized look of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has run out. She is not a credible witness. She is a servant girl with a grievance and access to records she was never meant to understand. The room went very still. Nora did not respond. She had learned early, that responding to this particular category of attack only confirmed the attacker's belief that the words had found a wound. She kept her face clean and her hands at her sides, and she waited. The Alpha King spoke. The records are the witness, he said, without heat, without emphasis, in the same even tone he had used to deliver the governance terms 30 seconds before. She is the archivist. I did not require her opinion. I required her expertise. He paused. One beat. Is there a distinction you would like to make between the two that the ledgers do not already make for themselves? Marit said nothing. Then we are finished here. Owen found her in the records room an hour later, which was where she had gone because it was the place in Ashenmoor most entirely her own, and she needed, briefly, to be somewhere that was hers. She was not doing anything useful. She was standing at the shelf of cycle reports with her hand resting against the spines, not pulling any of them out, just feeling the familiar ordered edge of them under her fingertips, present, intact. "You did well," Owen said from the doorway. "I stood still," she said. "In my experience," he said, coming in and taking his customary position on the edge of whatever surface was nearest, in this case the inventory table. Standing still when everything in a room wants you to collapse is a significant achievement. She didn't answer. He studied her for a moment, in that open, assessing way that she had decided she trusted, on the basis that it was the same quality of attention she herself gave to things she was genuinely trying to understand. "The position at the high throne," he said. Has your consideration produced a direction?" "I have nowhere else to go," she said. "That is not the same as a direction." "No," he agreed, "but it is an honest answer, and he will respect that more than enthusiasm he would have to check for accuracy." He tilted his head. "He asked me this morning whether you had slept." Nora looked at him. "He did not ask me to tell you that," Owen added. "I am telling you because I find selective disclosure professionally unsatisfying." She almost smiled. It surprised her, the nearness of it, the way it moved through her before she'd given it permission. She pressed it back, not from unhappiness but from the old habit of containing things in rooms full of people. "I dreamed last night," she said, and did not know why she said it. Owen waited. "There was light," she said. "In my hands." She looked down at them now, ordinary hands, ink-stained at the fingertips, slightly calloused along the right palm from years of writing. It felt... She stopped, started again. It felt like remembering something, not learning it, remembering it. The room was quiet. Then Owen said carefully, "Has anything unusual happened to you in the past 2 days? Physically?" She looked at him. "The candle," he said, "in his chamber. It was unlit when you arrived. It was burning when I came in afterward. He told me it was the draft." A pause. "Cole does not believe in drafts. The warmth in the table, the warmth in the doorframe, the budding branch she had not seen above the kitchen roof, the light in her hands in the silver forest of the dream. The bindings are stable so long as contact is avoided." She opened her mouth. She closed it. "Owen," she said very carefully, "do you know anything about binding curses?" The change in his face was immediate and controlled. A man who had learned to receive unexpected information without showing its full impact on arrival. He was quiet for a moment that was slightly longer than his usual pauses. "How specific a question is that?" he said. "Specific," she said. "I found something. In the records, 6 months ago." She kept her voice level, the way she always kept her voice. "A note, in a hand I didn't recognize, from the year of my birth." She held his gaze. "I think something was done to me when I was very small. I think my father knew. I think the pack knew." She paused. "I think whatever it was, I think it's coming undone." Owen looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he stood up from the inventory table and moved to the doorway. "Stay here," he said. "Do not touch anything you don't need to touch." He left before she could ask him where he was going. She knew where he was going. She pressed her hands flat against the shelf of cycle reports, and the warmth moved through the wood in that low, persistent pulse. Stronger today than yesterday, more present, less willing to be explained away. Above the records room, through 2 floors of stone, the Alpha King was sitting at the writing table in the corner chamber. She did not know this. She could not feel it. But he had not moved in an hour. He had been reading the same page since she came into the room below. Owen returned within the hour carrying a book Nora had never seen before. It was not from the Ashenmore records room. She knew every volume on these shelves the way she knew her own handwriting, and this was not one of them. It was old, smaller than a ledger, bound in dark leather that had been handled so many times the surface had taken on the soft, ambiguous quality of worn cloth. Owen set it on the inventory table without ceremony, and looked at her with an expression she had not yet seen from him, the openness still there, but something behind it now, careful and serious, the face of a man who has just confirmed something he had hoped would not need confirming. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "It travels with the court," he said. "Cole carries it." He paused. "He doesn't know why. He's had it since he was 12. It belonged to his mother, and before her, to her mother. And the line of possession before that is not recorded." He looked at the book. He knows it is significant. He has never known precisely how. Nora looked at the book on the table. She did not touch it. "Show me the note," Owen said. "The one from the records." She went to the shelf at the back of the room, the low one, the oldest ledgers, the ones no one else touched. She found the ledger from the year of her birth and carried it to the table and opened it to the back cover. And there it was, exactly as she had left it. Pressed into the end paper in handwriting that was neither her father's nor the pack healer's nor anyone else's she had ever identified, the brief, precise, devastating sentence. The girl must not be permitted to touch the wards, under any circumstances. The bindings are stable so long as contact is avoided. Owen read it once, read it again. Then he opened the old leather book to a page near the middle, with the focused efficiency of someone who knows what they are looking for and where to find it, and placed it beside the ledger so that both pages were visible. Nora looked. The handwriting was the same. She had to look at it twice to be certain. The ink in the leather book was older, paler, the hand slightly younger in its formation, as though the same person had written one document in early life and one in full maturity. But the particular formation of the letters, the way the writer made their B and the distinctive backward lean of their capital T, was identical. "Who wrote this?" she said. "I don't know yet," Owen said. "But look at the passage." She looked. The leather book was not a record or a ledger. It was something older than that. Part chronicle, part instruction, written in the slightly elevated formal prose of someone who understood they were setting something down for a reader they would never meet. The passage Owen had opened to was halfway through, and it began mid-thought, as though the earlier pages had established context she was now expected to carry. She read it. She read it again. Then she sat down, because the inventory table was immediately behind her, and her legs had made a unilateral decision. The passage was not long. It did not need to be. It described, in the careful, precise language of someone who had studied the thing they were documenting, a particular category of wolf gift. Rare, the writer noted, rare enough that most packs went 3 or 4 generations without encountering it, but and common enough that the records of it were old and consistent across many territories. Not the standard gifts, not the enhanced speed or strength, or the heightened senses that all wolves carried in varying degrees. Something older than those. Something the writer called, in the old tongue, Lunarath. Moon-touched. The direct translation was clumsy. The actual meaning was more specific and considerably more alarming. A wolf born with the capacity to channel the moon goddess's power directly, not through the mate bond, not through pack connection, but immediately and personally, the way a lightning rod channels what is already in the air. Such wolves did not shift in the conventional sense. Their wolf was not a second form, but a second layer of the same form, present always, invisible always, expressing itself not through physical transformation, but through the world around them. Warmth in cold stone, light in dead flames, growth in bare branches. The writer described, with the dispassion of careful scholarship, what happened when such a gift was suppressed. It did not diminish. It could not be removed. It could only be contained, bound in the old practice through a curse laid at birth, tied to the child's skin the way a weight is tied to a diver, pulling them permanently below the surface of what they were. The binding required 2 things to hold: a willing hand to lay it, and the continued isolation of the gift from any source capable of disrupting it. The passage ended with a sentence that Nora read 3 times before she trusted herself to look up. The binding breaks at the touch of its counterpart. The Lunarath gift and the Alpha claim were made in the first age from the same source. One does not merely recognize the other, one undoes the other. Neither will understand what has happened until the unraveling is already complete. She looked up. Owen was watching her with that careful, serious face. "How much," she said very quietly, "has already happened?" "The candle," he said. "The warmth you felt through the table and the door frame. The branch above the kitchen. One of the sentinels reported it this morning, thought it was strange for the season." He paused. "And last night, while you were in his chamber," he stopped. "What?" "The wards on the eastern wing," he said. "The boundary markers your pack uses to signal territorial edge. 3 of them activated spontaneously, full strength, in the middle of the night, as with no wolf anywhere near them." He looked at her. "Your father noticed. He came to me at dawn before we were even downstairs. That was what the raised voices were before you appeared on the landing. He was not angry about the ledgers, Nora. He was frightened." She thought about her father's face in the entrance hall, the look beneath the performance, the weight being set down. Not guilt, she understood now, not exposure, terror. He had known all her life what she was. He had known what the binding contained, and he had understood 20 years ago when the healer delivered the verdict in the courtyard with her face arranged into professional calm. He had understood that the verdict was not a diagnosis, but a cover story. A managed lie for a managed secret. And whatever he had been told would happen if the binding held. Whatever promise had been made to him in the year of her birth by the person whose handwriting was in the back of the ledger and the middle of the leather book. He had held to it for 20 years, faithfully, at the cost of his daughter. She thought about the kind of fear that makes a man move furniture in front of a door and tell himself it is architecture. She thought about the kind of fear that makes a pack decide a wolfless girl is the safest story to tell. She picked up the leather book and read the passage a 4th time and a 5th, the way she read figures she needed to be absolutely certain of. "He doesn't know," she said. "Cole, he doesn't know what the book contains." "No," Owen said. "He knows it is significant. He does not know it is—" He gestured, a slightly helpless motion for a man who was rarely helpless. "This. And the touching," she said. The word felt strange in her mouth, clinical and enormous at once. "The contact. How much has there been?" Owen was quiet for a moment. "The candle suggests the first instance was the door frame," he said. "Your hand on the frame, his proximity in the room, enough to create a small disruption." He paused. "Last night, in the records room, your hand on the table." "It was close to his," she said. "I noticed the warmth and moved it." "You moved it before full contact," he said, "which is why it was contained." Another pause. "If there had been direct, sustained contact, the binding would have broken entirely." "I believe so. Yes." The room was very quiet. Nora set the leather book down on the table, carefully, beside the open ledger. 2 documents written by the same hand, from the same life. I separated by decades and placed in this room this morning without either of their authors intending it. She thought about the silver forest and the light in her hands, and the voice that was not a voice saying, "There you are," with the comfortable certainty of something that had been waiting a long time and was no longer in any hurry. "He needs to know," she said. "Yes," Owen said. "Tonight," she said. "Yes." She stood up from the inventory table and smoothed the front of her dress with the flat of her hands. The old gesture, the preparing gesture, the one that meant she had decided something and was now organizing herself to act on it. "Owen," she said. He looked at her. "When it breaks," she said, carefully, steadily, in the voice she used for figures she had checked and found accurate and would not be revising. "When the binding comes apart, what happens to me?" He held her gaze. "I don't know precisely," he said. And then, because he was constitutionally incapable of softening information beyond what honesty permitted, "But I think you become what you were always supposed to be, And I think that is going to be considerably more than anyone in this pack was ever prepared to manage." She nodded once. She picked up the leather book and the ledger and carried them both, one in each arm, toward the door. She did not go to him immediately. She went first to her room, the narrow room in the servants' corridor, and she stood in the middle of it and looked at the small, careful life it contained. The orderly shelf of books she had been permitted to accumulate over years. The ink and the pen case and the extra candles she kept for the nights she worked past the household lights. The gray dress on its hook, the narrow bed with its plain linen. She had built this room from the inside out in the way she had built all her spaces. Quietly, carefully, making it livable without making it a claim. She thought about what Owen had said, considerably more than anyone in this pack was ever prepared to manage. She thought about the passage in the leather book, the Lunarath gift, the moon's power moving through her hands in the silver forest of her dream, not foreign, not frightening, but deeply, structurally familiar. The recognition of something that had been present her whole life, patient beneath the surface, expressing itself in the only ways available to it, in her precise and faithful record-keeping, in the part of her that refused to erase the original figures, in the quiet, cellular certainty she had always carried that the story being told about her was not the true one. She had known. In the way you know things you have not yet permitted yourself to know. She set the books on the bed. She straightened the gray dress on its hook. She looked at the narrow room for a long moment, in the way you look at something you are memorizing, and then she picked up the books and she left. She knocked at his door as the afternoon gave way to early evening, the light through the corridor windows going the particular amber that preceded Ashenmore dusk. "Enter." He was at the writing table again, but not writing, sitting with his hands still on the surface and his eyes on the window, as in the posture of a man who has been thinking rather than working. He turned when she came in, and whatever he saw in her face or her bearing or the books she was carrying made him straighten fractionally, the way he had straightened in the courtyard when something required his full attention. She set the leather book on the table in front of him. "This is yours," she said. "You have been carrying it for 23 years without knowing what it contains." She set the open ledger beside it, the end paper with the handwriting facing up. "This is mine, from the year of my birth." He looked at both documents. He looked at her. "Sit down," he said, in the quiet voice. "In a moment," she said. "I need to tell you something first while I am still standing, because I am not entirely certain I will say it correctly if I'm not." She held his gaze, the full look, steady and direct, the one she had given her father in the entrance hall. "Something is happening to me. It has been happening since I arrived in this room 2 nights ago, since the doorframe." She kept her voice level. "I believe it is because of you. I believe you have been, without knowing it, undoing something that was done to me when I was 4 days old. And I need you to read this passage." She reached past him and opened the leather book to the marked page, her hand coming close to his on the table and not quite touching, the warmth surging immediately against her palm. "Before either of us does anything else. Because after you read it, you will understand why the next thing that happens between us cannot be accidental." He looked at her hand, suspended above the open page. He looked at her face. He looked at the page. He read it. She watched him read it, watched the quality of his stillness change as the words accumulated, the slight tightening at the corner of his jaw, the single, controlled breath he took at the end of the passage and held for a moment before releasing it. He set the book down. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the amber light deepened toward gold, and the first of Ashenmore's evening torches was lit in the yard below, its warm circle catching the edge of the window glass. "You knew before you came in here," he said. "Yes. And you came anyway." She looked at him, at the face built for a colder world, at the crack in the armor she had been cataloging for 2 days without naming it, the particular weariness of a man who had been carrying power so long he had stopped being able to distinguish it from solitude. "I have spent 20 years," she said quietly, "being contained, being managed, being reduced to the size of the story someone else decided to tell about me." She paused. "I am not afraid of what I am. I have never been afraid of it. I have only been afraid of what happens when a room full of wolves decides that what you are is inconvenient." "This room," he said, "contains only one wolf." "Yes," she said, "I noticed." Something moved across his face, that almost quality again, the thing that was not quite warmth and not quite wryness but lived between them, in the country she was beginning to map. He looked at the leather book, at his mother's handwriting in the middle of the passage, the same hand that had pressed a note into a ledger in a pack at the edge of his territory in the year of a girl's birth. "My mother," he said, very quietly, to the page rather than to her. Not a question. The sound of a man placing something into its correct position in a much older story than the one he thought he had been living. "She knew what you were," Nora said, not unkindly, and she knew what would happen if the binding was laid. And she kept the record of it, here, in this book, because she was the kind of person who kept the originals. He looked up at her then, and the pale eyes held something she had not seen in them before. Not the controlled assessment of the courtyard, not the deliberate attention of the record sessions, but something rawer than either, as the face beneath the face, unguarded for one precise and unrepeatable moment. "What do you want?" he asked. It was the question no one had asked her in 20 years. It landed in her chest like a key finding a lock. "I want to know what I am," she said, "without a binding, without a story someone else laid over me before I was old enough to argue with it." She held his gaze. "I want the original." He was still for a moment. Then he turned his hand over on the table, a slow, deliberate movement, nothing accidental about it, the gesture of a man who had been told what contact meant and was making a choice with full knowledge of its weight. His palm rested open on the surface of the table. An offer, not a command. Nora looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She placed her hand in his. The binding broke like a held breath finally released. Not violently, not with the blazing theatrical force of the stories she had read as a child, but with the deep, structural relief of something that had been holding against its nature for 20 years and was finally, simply, permitted to stop. The warmth was not in the table this time. It was everywhere. Every torch in the room flared simultaneously. The dead ash in the hearth, cold since morning, caught without spark and held. The frost on the outside of the narrow windows, thin and persistent since dawn, ran clear in an instant. And through the walls, through 2 floors of old stone, out into the ward and the yard and the dark tree line beyond, the Ashen Moor wards blazed to full life in a chain of silver fire that every wolf in the territory felt simultaneously in the center of their chest. Cole did not let go of her hand. Nora looked at the light moving beneath the skin of her palm, silver white, quiet, entirely certain of itself, exactly as it had been in the dream, and felt, for the first time in 20 years, the precise and unmistakable sensation of taking up the correct amount of space. He was watching her face. "There you are," he said. She looked at him. His voice, those 3 words in that low, even tone, not a greeting, a recognition. She did not ask him how he knew what to say. She understood, with the deep structural clarity of the thing that had just woken in her chest, that he had not known, that the words had arrived in him the way the words arrived in her sometimes, in the records room, when she was cross-referencing 2 documents and the truth simply assembled itself without requiring her permission. Outside, the Ashenmore pack was standing in the yard and the corridors and the doorways, looking at the blazing wards, looking at the silver light moving along the tree line. looking at each other with the wide, startled eyes of wolves who have just felt something enormous pass through the pack bond and cannot yet name what it was. Inside the corner chamber, Nora did not let go of his hand either. The pack did not sleep. Nora knew this because she could hear them, the restless movement through the corridors, the low voices gathering and dispersing in the yard. The particular quality of collective unease that moved through a group of wolves when something had touched the pack bond without explanation. She had heard this sound before, at the edges of her life, the way you hear music through a wall, present, meaningful, not meant for you. Tonight it was different. Tonight she could feel it. Not the full bond, not the warm gold thread of mate connection the books described, and not the deep pack resonance of 200 wolves sharing their instincts like a single current. Something older than either of those. Something that moved beneath the bond the way bedrock moves beneath a river, present before the water arrived, present after it left. She sat at the writing table in the corner chamber with the leather book open before her and felt the pack's unease moving through the stone of the floor, through the wood of the chair, through the air of the room itself. And she understood, with the same deep structural clarity she had understood everything in the last hour, that this was what she had always been. Not absent from the pack. Beneath it. The ward fire had burned for 20 minutes before it steadied, not dying back to its ordinary dim boundary flicker, but holding at full brightness, clean and silver, the way wards held when something sovereign had passed through the territory and the land itself had taken note. Cole had stood at the window and watched it settle with his hands clasped behind his back, and she had watched him from the table, and neither of them had spoken for a long time. When he sat down, he sat across from her, not at the end of the table, not at the distance of 2 nights of careful professional consultation, but close, the way the last 2 hours had rearranged all the distances. He had asked her how she felt. She had considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Like a room where all the windows have been opened," she said, "all at once, after a very long winter." He had looked at her for a moment. "I have never heard anyone describe it that way," he said. "Has anyone described it to you before?" "No," he said, "but my mother's book has 4 accounts of the Lunarath gift. None of them use that particular—" He stopped. Something crossed his face. She would have liked that description. It was the most personal thing he had said to her. It arrived with the weight of something that did not come easily and had not been planned, and she received it accordingly, carefully, without making too much of it, setting it in the place she kept things that mattered. They had sat together for another hour, reading the relevant passages of the leather book in turn, building between them the architecture of what had been done and what it meant and what came next. He read precisely and without dramatics. She asked questions he answered without deflection. It was, she thought, the most honest conversation she had ever had in Ashenmore, and she was having it with a man she had known for 2 days, in a room that was not hers, in a life that was in the process of becoming unrecognizable. She had not yet decided whether that was frightening. She thought it might be the opposite of frightening. She thought she might not yet have the correct word for what it was. Her father came to her at midnight. She was in the corridor outside the corner chamber, walking back from the room she had gone to collect the last of the cross-referenced documents Owen had requested, when Kirk of Ashenmore stepped out of the shadows at the end of the hall. He was alone. No Maret at his shoulder, no performance of authority in his bearing. Just a man, grayer than she remembered him looking this morning, standing in the corridor of his own house with his hands at his sides. She stopped. She did not speak. She had learned from watching the Alpha King that silence, properly held, was not absence. It was a kind of pressure, an invitation for the other person to fill it with whatever was most true. Her father filled it. "I was told," he said slowly, as though the words were being assembled under difficult conditions, that it was necessary, that she would be hunted, that a Lunarath wolf in a minor northern pack that it would draw attention we could not survive. He paused. "I was told the binding was protective." "Who told you?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. A woman, he said. She arrived 3 days before your birth. She said she had been sent by the High Throne. She said she knew what the child would be, and that there were those who would come for her if the gift was known. He looked at his own hands. She laid the binding herself. She said it was temporary, that when the time was right, the right touch would undo it. He paused. She did not tell me it would be the Alpha King. Nora looked at her father, at the man beneath the performance, the younger man, the frightened one, the one who had stood in a courtyard 20 years ago and made a decision he had been paying for ever since in the currency of his daughter's life. She thought about what he was asking her for. She thought about whether she had it to give. I believe you were frightened, she said carefully. I believe the binding was laid with your permission because you were frightened and someone used that against you. She paused. That is not the same as what you did being acceptable, and it is not the same as me forgiving it tonight in a corridor because you have finally found the words. He nodded. A single small movement, the nod of a man who had expected exactly this and had come anyway, because some part of him understood that the accounting had to be made even if the balance could not yet be settled. The governance review, she said. You will cooperate with it fully. Yes. The tribute repayment, all of it, without reduction. Yes. She looked at him for a moment longer. Go to bed, she said, not unkindly. There is a great deal that needs to happen tomorrow, and it will require you to be coherent. He looked at her. One more look, the last accounting, and this time what she saw in his face was not the weight of managed distance, but something rawer and less containable. The look of a man seeing for the first time what the furniture he had pushed in front of the door had been holding back. Not inconvenience, not liability. His daughter. All of her. He left without another word. Nora stood in the corridor for a moment after he was gone, holding the documents she had collected, and let the feeling move through her without managing it. Large and complicated and too honest, the feeling she had folded away in the entrance hall this morning because the room had been full of people. She let it be large. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked back to the corner chamber. The morning assembled itself around what the night had made inevitable. Owen had been awake since before dawn. She suspected he was one of those people for whom sleep was an administrative function performed efficiently and then abandoned as soon as circumstances permitted. He met her and Cole in the records room with 3 documents prepared, a pot of tea he had obtained from somewhere, and the focused, slightly heightened energy of a man who finds the resolution of large, complicated situations genuinely satisfying. The formal inspection report would record the governance discrepancies and the terms of correction. This was already written. It would also record in the supplementary addendum Owen had drafted the discovery of a Lunarath wolf in the northern Pack territory, the first confirmed instance in 60 years, and the circumstances of the binding and its dissolution. This would be sent, in sealed copy, to the High Throne's archive. It will cause interest, Owen said, in the tone of a man significantly understating something. It will cause a great deal more than that, Cole said. He was looking at the addendum with the reading face, precise and unhurried, and then he set it down and looked at Nora. You understand that once this is recorded, the protection of obscurity is gone. I was obscure for 20 years, she said. Wait, it did not protect me from anything that was actually happening. Something moved in his face, that almost quality residing this morning closer to the surface than she had yet seen it. No, he said. It did not. He looked at the addendum for a moment longer. The position at court, he said. Records management. He paused, in the way he paused when he was deciding whether to say something more than was strictly necessary. That offer was made before last night. The terms have changed. Nora looked at him. The High Throne's archivist position has been vacant for 3 years, he said. It requires someone who keeps honest records, who understands that the original figures matter, who is not, another pause, manageable. He held her gaze. The position carries rank, formal standing. a seat at the governance table when matters of territorial record are discussed. "You are offering me more than you intended to offer me," she said. "I am offering what the situation now requires," he said. Which was both completely true and, she understood, not the complete truth. And the fact that she could tell the difference was, she thought, either a feature of her gift or a consequence of 2 days of careful observation, and possibly both. "I accept," she said. Owen made a small sound that was not quite a cough. Neither of them looked at him. The pack assembled in the yard at mid-morning. This had not been formally requested. Cole had not summoned them, Owen had not sent word, but packs were not managed the way records were managed. They moved by instinct and current, and the deep pull of things felt in the bond before they were understood in the mind. And the Ashenmore wolves had been feeling something in their bond since the previous evening that they could not name and could not ignore, and so they had simply gathered, the way water gathers in the lowest part of a landscape without being told to. Nora stood on the stone steps of the entrance with Cole to her right and Owen behind her left shoulder, and she looked at the assembled pack. 200 wolves, all ranks, from the sentinels at the perimeter to the children held at their mothers' sides. And she felt something she had no previous point of reference for. She felt them. Not the mate bond, not the pack bond exactly. She was not of Ashenmore, would not be of Ashenmore, as that particular thread was not hers to claim. But the Lunarath gift moved differently. It did not require the bond. It moved through the land, through the wards and the soil and the old deep roots of the pack's territory, and what it told her was not the specific content of 200 wolves' thoughts and instincts, but something larger and simpler than that. They were afraid. They were also, beneath the fear, with the cautious and tentative quality of people extending something they had retracted a long time ago, they were curious. She thought about 20 years of gray dresses and root cellars and careful invisibility. She thought about the old record books she was not supposed to touch and the notes in the margins she had preserved anyway. She thought about her father's face in the corridor at midnight and Owen's face in the herb garden and the feel of Cole's hand warm and deliberate and fully chosen beneath hers. She did not perform anything. She did not arrange her face or straighten her spine or compose herself into a version of what the moment seemed to require. She simply stood on the steps and let them see her. All of her. The woman who had sorted wolfsbane in the root cellar and kept the original figures and dreamed of silver forests and had been, the entire time, beneath all of it, this. The silence was complete. Then the wards, still burning at full brightness at the territory's edge, visible even in daylight as a silver shimmer along the tree line, pulsed once. A single, deep, resonant pulse, the way a bell sounds after the striking, is the note that is more feeling than sound. Every wolf in the yard felt it move through them. Nora felt it move through her. It was not a claiming. It was not the dramatic, witnessed proclamation the stories described, the Alpha King's formal words before the assembled packs of the kingdom. That would come later, in proper ceremony, before proper witnesses, with all the weight and deliberateness that Cole of the High Throne brought to anything he chose to do fully. But this pulse through the land, this recognition moving through the territory's bones, this was the first word of a true thing being spoken. She felt him beside her, the way you feel weather before it arrives. His hand found the inside of her wrist, not her hand, not the full contact that had broken the binding, but the specific, intentional warmth of 2 fingers resting lightly on her pulse point, where the silver luminescence moved closest to the surface, a private thing, invisible to the yard. She did not look at him. She looked at the pack. A woman near the front, older, gray-haired, wearing the sash of an elder, dropped her eyes first. A deep, deliberate dip of the head. The acknowledgement not of rank, but of something older than rank. The recognition of something sovereign passing through territory that was learning, slowly, in the way ancient things learn, that it had been more than it knew. A second wolf followed. A third. The movement passed through the assembled pack the way the pulse had passed through the land. Not in unison, not performed, but genuinely, one by one, each wolf making the choice at the moment the choice arrived for them. Aymaret did not bow. Nora had not expected her to. It did not matter. Her father, standing at the far left of the gathered pack with his hands at his sides, bowed. The court departed the following morning. The horses were assembled in the yard before first light, the sentinels mounted, the advisors' saddlebags already closed. Owen was in excellent spirits in the manner of a man who had come to a routine northern inspection and was leaving with a great deal more material than he had budgeted for, and he managed the loading with the efficient cheerfulness that appeared to be his natural state when things were going interestingly. Nora's belongings were packed in a single bag. She had thought it would feel like more, 20 years of living compressed into something carryable, but the things that mattered were small. The pen case, the 3 books she had acquired for herself, the ink. The rest was the furniture of a life that had been arranged around her absence, and she found she had no particular wish to carry it. She was standing at her horse, a bay the court had provided, steady-tempered, with the agreeable quality of an animal that had been many places and found all of them manageable, when Cole came across the yard. He had the leather book in his hand. He held it out. "It belongs with you," he said. She looked at it. His mother's handwriting in the middle pages, her own origin documented in the same hand, the document that had been traveling toward this moment for as long as she had been alive, carried unknowingly by a man who had not yet known why. "It belongs with both of us," she said. She did not take it. "Keep it. I know where to find it." He looked at her for a moment. The pale eyes held the quality she had mapped over 3 days, the controlled assessment, the deliberate attention, the crack in the armor that only opened in unguarded moments. And beneath all of it, this morning, something new. Not the rawness of the unguarded moment, something more settled than that. The quality of a man who has found a thing he was not looking for and has decided with full knowledge and no reservation to keep it. He put the book in his coat. "Nora," he said. She looked at him. "When we reach the high throne," he said, "I am going to need someone who keeps honest records." "Accurate records," she said. The same words, the same even tone a third time. The words that had meant something different each time she had said them and meant something different still. "In my experience," he said quietly, and she heard in it the echo of Owen's words from the herb garden, turned back like a reflection. "They are the same thing." She held his gaze for a long, still moment. Then she mounted her horse. The court moved out through the Ashenmoor gates as the first light came over the eastern ridge, gray softening to gold, the mist burning off the tree line, the silver wards steady and bright at the territory's edge. She did not look back at the gate. She did not look back at the root cellar or the records room or the narrow bed in the servants' corridor. She looked forward, at the road opening into the wider territory, at the morning arriving without apology over the hills. Beside her, Cole rode in his customary silence, unhurried, absolute, carrying the world's weight with the weary ease of a man who had been doing it long enough to stop finding it remarkable. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. But the warmth was there, steady and without source, moving between them through the cold morning air, and when the road curved and the trees closed behind them and Ashenmoor was finally out of sight, Nora spread the fingers of her right hand open against her thigh and felt the light move beneath her skin, silver white, patient, entirely certain of itself, and breathed. For the first time in 20 years. All the way in, all the way out. Ahead, the road led toward the high throne, and the archive that needed an honest keeper, and the life that had been hers all along, up waiting on the other side of a binding that had never been as permanent as the people who feared her had needed it to be. The silver light in her hands did not dim. It had no reason to. "If you made it this far, thank you. Truly." A comment or a like helps more people find these stories, and that's how this little community grows. I read every single one. See you in the next story. Love, Seer.